This is Eddie Hearn, Matchroom Boxing. You're watching Sporting Icons. You don't need to be anywhere else.
Alright everyone, I hope you're all doing fantastic, having a great day. If you're new to the channel, make sure you turn that subscription button from red to grey. It's absolutely free, it's brilliant over here. Make sure you do it. Anyway, so this is the video that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, which is compare the four main sanctioning bodies, WBC, WBA, IBF and WBO. Why? Because you need all four of those to become undisputed. Now, ideally a sanctioning body is a body that will show no bias towards fighters regardless of status, will show no bias towards promotional companies or managerial companies or anything like that, as in no bias in them. They will rank fighters fairly based on who it is that you've defeated, etc, etc. And of course, they're fair with their rules, so they have their set of rules and they stick by them. They don't deviate too much in favour of, again, companies or fighters themselves. So that's the perfect sanctioning body in my mind, plus a couple of other bits of course as well. But that seems to be that we're asking too much for the simplest of things. Each sanctioning body, all four of these ones, all have their pros and they have a hell of a lot of cons as well. So I'm going to cover all of them, again, without any kind of notes, just off the top of my head, no script. So I'm probably going to miss out some key points, which is where you guys come into it to fill some of them in. Now, we're going to start off with the IBF. Now, the IBF for me are probably, as far as rules go, these guys will not deviate from their rules. When they call a mandatory, then you will fight that mandatory. Okay, they have, again, their rules. 25% to the challenger, 75% to the champion, and you will fight them within the time that we give you. They will allow extensions here and there, but ultimately comply or get out. It don't matter who you are. They nearly stripped Joshua at one point, right after he defeated Klitschko. If you remember, when there was potentially that he could fight Luis Ortiz at WBA, his new WBA mandatory. But they're like, no, you're fighting Pulev, which turned out to be Kars Takam. So they don't care who you are. And they've literally just stripped Canelo Alvarez as well for the same kind of reasons, because they didn't negotiate in time, even though that they were given extensions, and they previously stripped Triple G. They are not averse to stripping anybody. And you have to respect them for it, regardless of whether it's your favourite fighter or not that they strip. These are the rules, this is what they will stick by. So you have to respect them for that point. Certain little things I don't like is, for example, Kubrat Pulev. He was the mandatory for Joshua at one point. That fight fell apart, whatever, he got injured. So he got re-ranked after being out of the ring for a hellacious amount of time, like usual. But he got put back in as number one, but not the mandatory. He had to fight another challenger for the mandatory, which turned out to be Hughie Fury, after Dillian White, Jarrell Miller and Dominic Brazil all turned down the mandatory fight with Pulev. And the reason that they turned it down is because, for whatever reason, the IBF seemed to think it's okay to have awarded Kubrat Pulev 75% of the purse. So ultimately, it was Hughie Fury who took that fight. He got 25%, which is ridiculous because it's for mandatory, when neither one of them are going into that fight as mandatory. So it's an even playing field. The winner becomes mandatory. So it's a 50-50, should be 50-50 split. IBF don't do that. For me, that's wrong. I agree that the champion, I have no issues with the champion getting 75% and the challenger, as in the mandatory, getting 25%. I have no issue with that. But two challengers fighting for the same thing for the mandatory, no, there should be 50-50. But again, this is their rules. Also, their ranking system ain't the greatest. It ain't the worst either, but it ain't the greatest. Now, what we can say about the IBF is that they don't appear to, at least from the outside, as all this video for all sanctioned bodies and all my opinions are just my opinions, but they don't show favoritism too much to certain fighters, to certain promotional companies. So again, that's another good thing. It's the red belt, it's the belt that all fighters would love to have, and the IBF are perfectly okay with unifications as well. They will have their moments of, no, you ain't unifying until you complete your mandatory. They do have those kind of situations as and when. So again, it's not really a criticism of them, but I think that the IBF overall are not a bad sanctioning body. They're not perfect, that's for sure. They do have or force weird mandatories. They really do. Most of you guys will remember when Kell Brook was IBF welterweight world champion. A lot of people were quite critical of the level of opposition that he was fighting. Why? Because they were forcing him to take mandatories against opponents that people didn't care to see. And there's no getting out of it. Errol Spencer's already had to fight one, as well as mandatory. So the IBF will throw in a mandatory for absolutely bizarre reasons as to why they become the mandatory. Okay, like Derevchenko, he was mandatory for Triple G. That fight didn't come off, so they stripped Triple G. The belt was vacant. Derevchenko fights for the vacant one against Daniel Jacobs. No issue with that. Daniel Jacobs wins. Derevchenko goes, fights an absolute nobody, wins that one, and then becomes mandatory again. I mean, what about everybody else in the big division, okay? So there's certain things that we could be unhappy with as far as the top spots are concerned, okay? Now, the IBF, not a bad sanctioning body, not great. I think that they could do with a bit of tuning here and there, but overall, they're not too bad. But I admire them, the fact that, whether I agree with some of them at times, but these are their rules and they will stick by them. So they deserve a lot of credit. Moving on to the WBO. Now, the WBO are the new kids on the block. Because before, to become undisputed, you didn't need the WBO. Now you do. Okay, so you need all 4 titles, hence this video here, which is why I'm talking about all of them. But WBO are the new kids on the block, and they are trying to still almost prove themselves at times. But as far as the ranking systems go, the WBO, in my opinion, are atrocious. Their ranking, they will rank fighters that you have never heard of in their top 15. They really will. And when you look at what it is that they've done, some of these fighters, you're like, how the hell are you on that position? And the reason being, again, from the outside looking in, not factual, but I think most people would agree, the WBO show favouritism to top-ranked Bob Arum and Frank Warren and his Queensberry fighters. They show bias, and they're almost quite blatant about it. Recent developments is that Nicola Adams has become a WBO world champion for doing bugger all. Listen, I like her, and I'm happy that she's champion, but she didn't do anything. She's just been elevated to champion because the fight fell apart. Rather than go fight somebody else. It's a little bit ridiculous. When you look up and down WBO rankings, you're like, who the hell are they? When you look into them, they're either a Bob Arum fighter or a Frank Warren fighter. So they show a lot of favoritism towards them. There's a conflict at the minute between Al Heyman and his PBC, Premier Boxing Champions, and the WBO. Because WBO don't rank PBC fighters. I mean, if you start off at heavyweight, you have to go all the way down to welterweight to see number 3 rated Danny Garcia. That's how anti-PBC that they are. Why? Is it because their favoritism towards Bob Arum and Frank Warren? Is that the reason why? But again, you can kind of flip the script on them and say, but we understand why that WBO do it, because WBC show hellacious favoritism with the PBC and Al Heyman. So maybe they're just being anti-establishment, if you like, but they're showing a lot of bias. So that is one hell of an issue in my mind, because there's so many fighters out there that should be in the WBO rankings, but are not. And the reason being that they're not is because they're not necessarily a Frank Warren or a Bob Arum fighter. And that's just how it is, in all truth. And a lot of their fighters as well only had like half a dozen fights, and already they're ranked in the top 15. And if they're not ranked in the top 15, then they've got a version of a WBO title, whether it be a European or an international or an intercontinental, whatever it may be. There's too many titles out there for the WBO. So that is a hellacious criticism in my mind. They are very, very biased. Very biased, and their ranking system sucks because of that bias. But these guys, they do have their rules. Do they stick to them? You can argue yes, you can argue no. One thing that I can admire as well is where across the board there's this myth that unification trumps all other. It's actually a myth. It's not true. They usually allow it. All sanctioning bodies, they allow a unification, but they don't have to. And the WBO have proved more often than any other sanctioning body, when it comes down to it, that they won't necessarily allow a unification. When you look at, say, the heavyweight title was vacant, okay, after Tyson Fury vacated WBO, and Joseph Parker, Andy Ruiz Jr., they fought for the vacant title. Joseph Parker won or got the decision, depends on how you look at it. And rather than him have a voluntary or anything like that, they went, no, you are going to be fighting our mandatory. He's like, well, okay, how about if I can't have a voluntary, well, can I go unify against Wilder or Joshua? And they're like, no exemptions. You'll be fighting your mandatory. At the time, it was David Haye. He then pulled out and went for Tony Bellew. Big mistake, David Haye. But Hughie Fury then replaced. Why? Because he's a Frank Warren fighter, okay? You kind of see the scenario. And of course, Joseph Parker and Andy Ruiz Jr. were both Barbarian fighters, right? So they enforced Hughie Fury and Joseph Parker to fight for, well, Hughie Fury was installed as the mandatory. The fight fell apart. Hughie Fury got injured, didn't go to New Zealand. And Joseph Parker thought, right, okay, so listen, I need to have a fight anyway, so it's going to be a voluntary. You're okay with that? Like, yeah, that's fine. But you are going to have to reschedule with Hughie Fury now. So again, no exemptions, no unifications until you sort out your mandatory, which is why you had to fight Hughie Fury. So these guys are evidence that unification does not take precedence above all of it. It's down to the sanctioning body. Okay, so again, when you look at the WBA, now WBA, they're the oldest governing body around. They've been around the longest and are arguably the most respectable out of all of them. A lot of people seem to think it's WBC. No, just that WBC are more famous. There's a difference. Whereas WBA have the historical value to them. And every fighter would love WBA champion. Again, when you look at it for bias point of view, WBA don't seem to have too much bias to one promotional company or certain fighters, not at all. But they are kind of flexible at times with their own rules. They also do have, unlike, which I forgot to mention about the WBO as well, the WBO, their clean boxing program or their insistence on clean sport, not that high, really isn't. Oh, and WBO not too keen on unifications as well, going by some stories. But back onto WBA, these guys are more than happy for unifications. In fact, these guys are probably more favourable than any other, and that's good. They are more pally with the WBC than they are anyone else. The president of the WBA has a good relationship with the president of the WBC, as Mauricio Suleiman. They have a pretty good relationship. But the WBA, while they should be the daddy of them all, because they are the oldest and the most respectable, they do tend to play second fiddle to certain sanctioning bodies. They do tend to take a bit of a kick in, have their pants pulled down and slapped, and they're like, okay, no problem. They're almost the weaker one out of all of them. Listen, don't get me wrong, if you press that button too much, they're going to explode. But the WBA, some of their stupidity that they have, as all sanctioning bodies is, they keep on creating these regular world titles. So they always have 2 world champions in their divisions, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. They need to get rid of that regular title. They really do. It's just absolutely pointless. It's causing confusion for a lot of people. Who's the world champion? Who's really the world champion? And they go super champion, a regular champion, and this champion and that champion. It's annoying. They even created a gold title, which Joe Joyce currently has. So these guys don't know whether they're coming and going. They're like sanction fees, quite clearly. And their ranking system, I can't argue with it too much. Again, they don't seem to show too much bias as far as fighters go and promotional companies. But their ranking system, not great, especially a heavyweight. We look at the top. Why you've got Manuel Charles, the regular champion, I will never know. Why is Fraser Quendo still ranked? He hasn't fought in 25 years. And you've got other ones like Trevor Bryan. He's one of the most inactive current fighters around, and he's ranked highly. So you have to question the WBA's ranking system. Like, do they have stupid people working there? Don't they actually watch boxing? I don't understand. So their ranking system sucks. But they're a very, very respectable organisation, and they are up for unifications. And they do insist on VADA. Okay, especially when you're champion for championship fights, you have to have VADA, which is great. But unless, of course, you're Manny Pacquiao and Keith Thurman, then they're not necessarily going to insist on it. Okay, so they do bend their rules here and there, depending on how you look at it. But overall, they're not a bad sanctioning body. They don't go out and try and make themselves famous. Which brings us on to the WBC. In my opinion, the most cringeworthy organisation that there is. Cringeworthy in the sense of every time something's happening, Mauricio Suleiman is there with a cheesy grin on his face, creating a special title for a special fight. Doesn't matter what it is. They show hellacious amounts of favoritism to Mexicans, certainly, and American fighters. Again, all this from the outside looking in. Is it factual? No, it's just my opinion. But that's what it appears to be, especially PBC fighters. If you're not Mexican and you're a PBC fighter, you're still going to get favoritism. When Canelo Alvarez got popped with PEDs, whether he was innocent or whether he wasn't, tainted meat, was it not? They still said, well, even though that we insist on clean boxing, which is a great thing, by the way, although it's a bit ridiculous that they're actually getting referees and judges in on it now, it's a bit bizarre. But they even stood by Canelo and said, well, it doesn't matter, we still stand with him. Well, that's contradicting your whole idea of wanting a clean sport, isn't it? So they're not above certain fighters. They put certain fighters on a pedestal, which is why they created this franchise champion for Canelo. When you look at the heavyweight with Deontay Wilder, you're supposed to have a mandatory every 12 months maximum. He's been champion for 4.5 years, coming up 5 years, actually not too far off, and he's only had 2 mandatories. Why? Because again, he's allowed to do whatever he wants. He's a PBC fighter against poor opposition as well. So WBC, they are very needy. They even created a belt to give to the bloody Pope. I mean, why would the Pope need a WBC heavyweight title belt for, or title belt in general? Why would he need that for? Mauricio Sulaiman, you are cringeworthy. You actually make me cringe sometimes. I've even seen him on Instagram with WBC seat belts on his car and strapping on his kids with a WBC belt going across. I mean, there's fanboying for your own company, then there's just being cringeworthy. Okay, but as far as the sanctioning bodies go, with the ranking system for WBC, it ain't too bad. Not necessarily in the order that I would like, but again, you're never going to satisfy everybody. But I think when you look across the body for certain weight divisions, they're not bad. The ranking system isn't too bad, but they do show favoritism. Whereas Dillian Whyte, he should have got his world title shot a long time ago, but he still hasn't. And they've even suspended Dillian Whyte, even though he's been passing VADA, which is their rules. So again, showing favoritism, okay, and dislike for others. They seem to be quite an emotional company. They have guys such as Brett Yormark, who works on the Supreme Council for the WBC, highly influential, right? Also works for the PBC Al Heyman, or a branch of it, and runs the Barclays Centre. Conflict of interest much? Right, so these guys, out of all of them, they seem to be, again, I don't know it, but from the outside looking in, these guys appear to be the most corruptible out of all the organisations, or the most naive, as in they live in like their own little bubble and don't take on board anything that the fans think should be in boxing. Now, I have to give them a lot of credit with the clean boxing program, in the sense of they want a clean sport. Or do they? As I said with Canelo, they can go to the extremes like they have with Dillian Whyte. Okay, and they can, when Deontay Wilder signed up to fight Tyson Fury, magically Tyson Fury, after being out of the ring for 2.5 years, listen, I love Tyson, but he's out of the ring for 2.5 years, he's got a PED record, and he fought 2 absolute bums who I could probably beat, and he ranked him number 3 or number 4 on the WBC. Why? Because it seemed plausible that Wilder would fight a highly ranked opponent for the first time in his entire career, by the way. Well, exception Luis Ortiz, I suppose. But Tyson Fury shouldn't have been ranked. You know why he shouldn't have been ranked? Because he wasn't enrolled in the clean boxing program, which is a rule. In fact, he wasn't enrolled in the clean boxing program until about 3 weeks before the fight. So he should never have been ranked. And that's the truth of it. So these guys will bend their rules to suit, and it does seem to suit either a Mexican such as Canelo or PBC fighters. So these guys, when most people look in, most people will say the WBC are the worst for corruptibility. And these guys have created that fame, if you like, because they're clueless about what the fans want. The mandatories that Wilder's taken on, Bermane Stiverne and Dominic Breazeale, neither one of them should have been mandatory. Neither one of them. They allowed Wilder to not fight Povetkin, even though Povetkin was within the legal limit as far as PEDs go for this particular substance. He was within the legal limit because it was previously legal. And they allowed Wilder to not fight. So, Mauricio Sulaiman, you need to sort your damn self out and sort out your organisation and stop being so ultra biased, much like your father was with Don King in that before. So these guys are the most biased, real biased. The WBO are a very, very close second. In fact, they're nearly number one when it comes to Bob Arum and Frank Warren. But the WBC, in my opinion, they have the best ranking system, and these guys are not perfect, we know this, but they insist on a clean sport. So again, WBC deserve a lot of credit for that. But who's the best one out of all four of them? It's debatable. They all have their pros, they all have their cons. In my opinion, I respect the clean boxing program with the WBC, even though that they do twist just because they don't like certain fighters or certain promoters. But if they stuck to their rules with a clean boxing program, they would be the best as far as that goes. The IBF, they will be the best as far as sticking to their damn rules for across the board. The WBC have the best rankings, even though it's not perfect, but the WBA seems to go about their business all well and good. And the WBO, as I said, new kids on the block. So who's the best one out of all of them? I'm probably going to have to edge it with the IBF. That's my honest opinion. The worst one, probably the WBC, as of right now. And not just because of the whole Dillian White situation, but many, many different scenarios. But hopefully, the WBC, they are a credible title, of course, but they're going to get to a point where a lot of fans, I see it all the time, daily, that fans have just had enough of the WBC. And Rizzo Sulaiman and the WBC are totally oblivious to it because they live in their own little world and create their own little rules about even making judges and referees do testing. I mean, this is, I don't know anything like it. But anyway, I suppose everyone's got to try something. So that's my thoughts on it all. Of course, you drop me yours. Which sanctioning body do you believe, while none of them's perfect, of course, is the most reliable, is the best one, and who is the worst? Drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, subscribe. Catch you all on the next one.